Hello and welcome to this very special edition of Conversations at Hub101.Earth. My name is Yuejia and I'm the founder and managing director of Hub101.Earth, which is an open access global platform for information sharing and capacity building. Today I'm in the middle of a beautiful field in Western Zimbabwe, and I am joining Rory Pilossof, who is the country manager of My Trees Trust, a nonprofit based in Zimbabwe, and also a special partner to Hub101.Earth. Welcome, Rory.
Hi, Yuejia. Thank you so much. Great to be here.
So to start off, Rory, maybe you can tell us a bit about My Trees Trust. What is it that you do and your role within the organization?
So yeah, My Trees has a very simple, straightforward motto: plant and protect. And we try and plant indigenous trees, the right trees in the right places, as many as we can. And then we also try and protect intact ecosystems and intact wildlife areas alongside the restoration work that we do. So we now have the nursery capacity to plant 1 million trees a year. And the vast majority of those trees are planted with small-scale farmers who have available land that's degraded or not being productively used, and we plant trees with them. This is a perfect example of what we try and do. It's about 1 hectare of land and we plant 1,000 trees per hectare. And we're trying to start that restoration process to develop proper indigenous woodland cover, representative of the Myombo in this area.
Maybe if you can share with me a little bit more about the background. So, why is My Trees work important? What's the problem that you're trying to address in this part of Zimbabwe?
There's been a lot of deforestation in the country for a long time. And when we first started, the idea was just to try and see if we could get trees to be planted. Can we plant trees? Can we get them to survive? Can we work out a model to work with small-scale farmers who've got spare land to get those trees to come back? I think a lot of rural communities in Zimbabwe face a lot of challenges. Deforestation is one of them, which has knock-on impacts on the soil, the agricultural production, water retention. So first of all, can we make the trees work? Can we grow them? And that slowly developed to finding more ways to work with the community, contract people to grow the tree. And then the long-term thinking about running a carbon project, which will hopefully derive income from those trees, which we can work with our small-scale growers and provide a long-term livelihood impact, which will hopefully help change the landscape, but also people's lives in the area. Alongside that, we're losing a lot of habitats. We're losing a lot of intact ecosystems, not just in Africa, but across the world. And so protecting those ones which are still thriving and still functioning is very important for us as well. So that's why the motto, plant and protect. Plant where we can, but also protect where it's necessary. We're in Karoi, close to Karoi right now. And so the idea is to try and plant trees in this area along kind of agricultural hub in Zimbabwe, small scale, commercial, and kind of rural agriculture. But just down that way, you get to the Zambezi Valley and down into those wildlife areas close to the Zambezi River and Kariba. So try and think about how we would intervene across this whole landscape. Yeah, we can plant trees. There we can manage the buffer zones, the zones between where people live and the wildlife areas. And then think about the kind of conservation and biodiversity work in those wildlife areas.
Yeah. And would you say what are the main drivers of deforestation for these community-led landscapes? I think perhaps there's some, land use and energy challenges.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is primarily an energy crisis that Zimbabwe faces, and that's not unique to Zimbabwe. Many parts in sub-Saharan Africa face the same challenges. Most households have no alternative except to use wood as domestic fuel. Heating water, cooking food, heating the home. And seeing that change in the next 5 to 10 years is very difficult to see because of the infrastructure costs that come with trying to provide energy to these rural households. The colonial history in Zimbabwe also has impacts: the way land was used, the way it was managed, the way people were put where they were, and the environmental kind of stress in those areas where people were forced to live. And then also recently, you've seen a shift in Zimbabwe after the kind of land reform programs that we had in the 2000s. There was a move towards small-scale tobacco production. And that small-scale tobacco production has been really amazing for a lot of small-scale farmers who need the livelihood, but it's had a massive cost on the environment because of the use of wood to cure that tobacco. So in the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen a rise in the small-scale tobacco farming numbers. I think we have about 140,000 small-scale farmers registered now, who mostly rely on wood to cure that tobacco. And so, along with domestic use, we've seen a massive rise in a need for wood to cure tobacco, which has just had a lot of negative impacts on the environment and the woodland around us.
And in fact, that's kind of an economic reality in that creates cash income for these smallholders, and which they need for livelihood, for health, education, all of those things. So then maybe let's talk a bit more about your focus on, your work focuses on the community and getting them to plant indigenous species. So can you talk a bit more about that, how you're engaging with the local community, making sure that they own part of the project?
Yeah, so when we first started, in our first years, it was, let's just plant trees and see how that works. And then it was an evolution into, okay, well, let's just make sure we plant the right trees in the right place. We want to bring back the kind of natural woodland which should be around here for all the biodiversity impacts that should have. And then it was like, okay, fine, we can plant the right trees in the right place, but we've got to work out what are the drivers of deforestation and how do we work with the local communities who are working alongside us to try and make this work. So My Trees kind of contracts farmers right from the off to plant trees and pays them for that work. Especially in the first years when the trees are quite small, they're the most vulnerable. So let's put that incentive in at the beginning to make sure they survive, and once they get bigger, hopefully they'll form part of the long-term carbon project that we've got, which as we sell those carbon credits, we can push as much of the income to the small-scale farmers that we work with. My Trees is a not-for-profit, so we're trying to find these models where you can scale up and run these kind of social enterprises, which will make some money, but hopefully pay for the environmental stewardship that we're going to want to see in place. And every year, hopefully take on more and more cohorts of growers who see the program is working, understand that it's got kind of financial value, and at the same time, a lot of people we work with understand the deforestation impact is affecting them directly, so how can we find ways to mitigate it? When we first started, actually, a lot of the people we kind of said, let's plant trees with, let's see if we can find ways to make the trees grow. The kind of response was like, no, God grows trees, we don't grow trees. And we said, that's yeah, but can we also find ways to intervene so we can help that process? Let's collect the seed, let's nurture the seed, let's grow it in these pockets in our nurseries, and then let's plant it in the field. And I think slowly people have kind of come along to see that it can work, it is feasible. These trees are a product of what we're doing. And this is an example of a kind of second-year plot, but we've got 4 or 5-year-old grows of trees now which are creating their own shade, creating their windbreaks. There's bird nests in there, there's biodiversity, upticks as well. So it's starting to gather that kind of momentum that's needed for that local buy-in.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when you hear about tree planting initiatives from around the world, I remember a few years ago there was a huge uptake in announcements of various projects, and I think the general feeling is that you see these big numbers being displayed on how many trees were planted, but you hear less about how well they're doing after a few years. And I think that's a challenge of planting new trees, is are you following up? Are you planting the right species in the right places, as you say? Your motto is right trees in the right place. So, in terms of what do you think the lessons are in running a afforestation project and planting? What are some of the key learnings that you can share? Most tree planting projects, what are the problems that they face, and what are you doing to combat that?
We are conscious that a lot of tree planting projects fail. It's very easy to kill a tree, and it's very easy to plant a tree that's got very little chance of survival. So we've been thinking about that a lot and seeing which ways we can make this project successful. Like we said, indigenous trees, the right trees in the right place, the trees that are adapted to these local conditions so they've got the best chance of survival, I think is very important, and also has real biodiversity impact later on. But also making sure that our work with the communities that we're engaging with has got a long-term footing. If we can make the carbon project work, if we can make the long-term finances make sense, and we can almost treat these groves of trees as pensions for people who work with us. Let's grow the trees, they're going to survive, they're going to derive income for the next 20, 30 years from these, and it's something that's a sort of adaptation measures for changes which might come due to changes in climate. I think a lot of the agricultural activities that people undertake now might not be viable in 5-10 years' time because of changes in rainfall, because of changes in temperature. And we're hopeful that as these trees are planted and established and keep sequestering carbon, they might become that long-term pension. That will benefit not only the people who live and work here, but also the environment and nature around us. We've put a lot of work into our nurseries and making sure we provide good seedlings for people that get trees from us. But we've also started to develop a lot more of the extension work, trainings, ongoing sessions throughout the year about how we looked after the trees and how we manage the trees as they grow, as well as how we plant the seeds and the seedlings and make sure they've got every chance of survival. We've also developed our own app for monitoring the trees, so we are able to see the growth rates and survival rates of the plots that are already under our program. We're able to see when our counters go and visit those fields and how much time they spend in each field. And we make sure there's lots of points of contact for the growers that we work with, so there's a continual engagement in the program. And we can keep watching the trees and see how they grow and see how well they're developing, so that we know what the survival rates are, we know what the growth rates are, and we know how successful we are with the project.
Yeah. No, I think it's a wonderful example of what close partnerships with local communities can do, and ongoing monitoring, reporting, transparency and capacity building in those communities going forward. So then, as country manager, I was wondering, what are your ambitions and plans for the future?
Yeah, so last December, we finally got permission from government to establish a carbon project in this landscape, which is really, really massive for us. That took a couple of years of getting through the system, and Zimbabwe has a really robust carbon policy framework now and a really transparent registry of all carbon projects. And we've got our registration sorted out, which is amazing for us. And we have an LOA, and we're Article 6 compliant, and we are now going to go and get ourselves registered with Gold Standard so that we can have a proper, credible carbon project up and running. With that project up and running, our vision is to kind of do a project instance of 10 million trees. The next 5 years, let's plant 10 million trees. This year we planted 700,000 trees, and next January we'll plant 1 million trees. So our capacity is already 1 million trees a year, and that's working with 1,000 households a year. But we need to expand that quicker so we can get more trees in the ground as quickly as possible. So yeah, we want to imagine a project instance of 10 to 11 million trees in the ground. Get those planted and get those sequestering carbon as soon as we can, and then look to develop more projects of that scale within this landscape that we've got permission. As I said as well, it's not just plant, it's also protect. So we want to see our protection footprint increase so that we can manage a lot more of the landscape down towards the Zambezi Valley and into the Zambezi Valley. One of the key criteria for us is thinking about that buffer zone of the edges between where people live, the communities and communal areas, and then the wildlife and protected areas down in the Zambezi Valley. Those buffer zones used to be really well established, help prevent human-wildlife conflict and help let the environments in those protected areas thrive. But in the last 20-30 years, those have eroded a bit, and there's been a lot more intrusion, and it's not so clear where those buffer zones are. So let's get those buffer zones back in place. Let's help the communities who live alongside those buffer zones to find other livelihood alternatives, and make sure we can help those environmental areas stay as robust and intact as possible. So it becomes much more of a landscape intervention, doing the right things in the right place. Yes, here we can plant trees, there we can manage the buffer zone, and there we can do the kind of conservation and biodiversity work. So it's a huge area that we want to take on, but we're really excited about it, and the team's really passionate about it. And I think we can sort of see what the successes have been so far, and now we need to scale those so that we can really have a massive impact across this whole landscape, which is daunting and exciting at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, the entire landscape and ecosystem are all connected, right? The communities, the biodiversity, the trees. So I'll end with one last question for you. What are the sort of support that this project need in the immediate future or going into the further number of years?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we're trying to look for a real credible partner to help us grow the carbon the AR project, get the 10 million trees in the ground. That's our next big target, and I think we've got so much in place already to get us to that next level. We've got good survival rates, we've got good community relations, We've got a solid foundation where we can do 1 million trees a year already. And now we need to get to that 10 million trees over the next 5 years. So that's going to take a lot of finance and commitment to get it done. But it's also going to take a lot of technical skill to make sure we're complying with all the regulations and make sure we can do the monitoring and counting work properly. It's going to be a big undertaking, but we're ready for it and we've started to prepare as much as we can. At the same time, the conservation work is also expensive and costly, and it's a different facet to what we do in terms of working alongside communities, but also trying to enforce the environmental laws and policies we have in place. And so we're always looking for people who can help us manage that work as best we can and make sure the impact we're having is not only for the environment, but for the people and the communities that live in or alongside those areas. Exposure is always useful, getting our message out as much as we can. I think we manage the tree planting work really well, we manage our nurseries really well, and we work really well with the communities. Our marketing and online presence isn't as strong. That's definitely not a strong point that we have, and we've got to get better at getting our message out there and telling people the work that we're doing and how well we're doing it. So any ideas, any thoughts, any processes that help us kind of get a bigger target and get more exposure, we really appreciate that. We've worked with a range of different partners already, right from CSR, corporate support, to philanthropy, to donors and institutional funders. Obviously the world has changed quite a lot and those funding streams aren't necessarily there anymore. So we're trying to adapt and find more ways to raise the money we need and also keep having the impact that we're having in this landscape. It's a fast changing world, I think we all know that. But we've been pretty nimble and adept at finding different forms of finance. But I think long term, having a market-based approach, which is going to allow us to have a carbon project that's going to make sure we maintain our relationship with the communities and growers we work with, that's what we have to look towards now. We have to be self-sustaining and we have to find ways to make that work. I think you mentioned earlier we're a not-for-profit, so we want to make sure we can derive or make sure most of the income that we're going to create will go to the landscapes and communities we work with. And that's quite an interesting model for Zimbabwe. It's not really kind of had those projects yet, so we're looking forward to seeing that succeed and having as much impact as we can.
Yeah, so long-term sustainable financing and various partnerships to achieve your goals.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Rory. This
Absolute
was
pleasure.
Very exciting to be in this field, and I always learn a lot from you every time we speak, and yeah, I look forward to carry on chatting about lots of different things.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and thanks so much for visiting us out here. It's great to show you around and kind of give you a direct insight to what we're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.